Thank you. All set.
Okay,
Mr.
started.
Okay. I'll call to order the meeting of the Municipal Accountability Review Board for Thursday, February 27, 2025. It's a special meeting, I gather. No,
No.
it's a regular meeting. Excuse me.
We
It's
are
a
on a
regular
regular.
meeting. So we'll move through our agenda hopefully crisply today. Want to be respectful of everyone's time. It is a volunteer board, and it is a busy time of year for those of us who are not volunteers. So it's a Teams meeting. Please, members and speakers, please speak clearly so that your comments will be recorded for the minutes. Does my co-chair, Mr. Alvarez, have any opening remarks?
I do not, but thank you.
Alrighty then. We'll move into our second item, which is our public comment period. Please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less due to the length of today's agenda. Are there any members of the public wishing to make comments? Staff will let me know if you see any hands raised. Any members of the public seeking recognition to make comments today? All right. Well, in the absence of any hands being raised, we'll conclude that section and move on to section 3, approval of our minutes from the January 27, 2025 special meeting. A copy of the draft minutes were sent to Marb members ahead of time, I hope, and you've had a chance to consider those. Yeah, if you're not speaking, please keep yourself on mute so we can not get any other conversations out there. Any discussion of the minutes from the January 27 meeting? Then I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Motion made
Second.
and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. We'll move on then to our first section, which is the City of
Mr. Chair?
Hartford. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Weiselberg.
Good morning. I'd just like to abstain from that motion.
All right. We have an abstention from the vote on the minutes.
Thank you. I was not present at the meeting.
Or president, which is a shame because I would certainly love to live under a President Weisselberg. I think that would be an amazing thing. We'll move on then to the City of Hartford section of our agenda. Subcommittee update. The Hartford Subcommittee met in January and a summary of the meeting was included in the packet. Do staff or any member of that subcommittee have a report for us? Going once?
Yes, we've included it in the packet for the Hartford subcommittee. Today you'll see that the Hartford Public Schools has hired a new financial officer, Caitlin Richard. I believe that she's with us today when we get to that area of discussion. The Hartford's presentation was provided for their fiscal year 24 audit report, and Clifton and Larson presented that at the subcommittee, and the firm issued an unmodified opinion for their financial statements, their federal and state audit reports, and they found no internal control weaknesses as well as outside of no compliance issues. And at the end, the general fund increased by $20.6 million for fiscal year 24 for a total of $73.4 million in fund balance as of June 30th, 24. The reports were issued on time by December 31st, and they did not need to request any waiver of extension for that reporting period. Other business that was discussed at the time was just to get an update for the subcommittee to learn where the board and the city stood as far as their collective bargaining agreements, as they have expired. Many contracts had expired, and we did learn that they are in negotiation both on the board side as well as the city side. And that's my update.
Any questions or comments about the subcommittee report? Okay, we'll move on then to the next item on our agenda, which is review and discussion of a refunding of the general obligation bonds related to the City of Hartford. In your packet was a memo from the State Assistant Treasurer for Debt Management that summarizes a proposed refunding of the City of Hartford general obligation bonds under the contract for financial assistance between the city and the state. With the city now a Tier 2 municipality, this transaction does not require Marb approval, but it is to advise the Marb of this proposed transaction. I understand we have Kimberly Moores, Assistant Treasurer for Debt Management, and Ernest Lorimar, representing the state, to give us an overview of the refunding.
Good morning. This is Kim Moores, Assistant Treasurer for Debt Management. I'm in the box with my colleague, Amanda Nocera, because my camera decided to not function this morning. So we're going to tag team here.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. The memo that was in the packet summarizes what we're trying to do for the City of Hartford. The contract assistance special obligation refunding bonds will, market conditions permitting, refund, I believe it's 6 series of outstanding general obligation City of Hartford bonds, approximately $160 million total refunding size of that transaction. So as the Marb knows, in 2018, the state and the city entered into a contract assistance agreement under which the state took over the payment of all of the city's general obligation bonds. One of the provisions of that contract was that the state could choose to do a refinancing if it made sense. And so the first refunding was done in 2023. And we are just seeking to do a second refunding now for all the callable bonds that I just mentioned. Obviously, we choose to do these refinancings because they save the state money and debt service. So again, it's market conditions permitting that we would select a series of bonds, City of Hartford bonds that would be refunded, again, for the purpose of saving the state money on debt service. So we are looking at savings of approximately $10 million over the remaining life of the refunded bonds. It's about 11 years, so about $1 million a year. And we plan to do this transaction in conjunction with or in tandem with the state's larger general obligation bond sale, because it's essentially the due diligence and the disclosure are almost identical. So we will be working this in alongside that state GO bond sale. And as you stated, Secretary Beckham, the city is Tier 2 now, so we are here to notify Marb, but we will take your guidance on whether or not a formal approval is required or needed. And with that, I open it up for any questions you might have for me.
Questions concerning the refunding of these outstanding bonds? It's good job, good work. Always like to save debt service. It is exempt from the cap, but it is an obligation we have, and we have a pretty high issue with that, as you know, compared to our sister states. And in fact, as you were talking about the bond sale this spring, my invitation to the bond rating presentations were trickling into my email there, and I've accepted those. I think they're later in March.
Well, thank you.
Always a fun day talking to the rating agencies.
And we always appreciate your participation in those. It's really quite important and essential. So thank you for that.
Questions from the Marb? Looks like this is a good thing. We're glad you're here. Thanks for your hard work. And if there are no further questions, we'll let you get on with your day.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll then move on to the next item on our agenda, which is review and discussion of the monthly financial reports for the city and the Board of Ed for Hartford. These are the financials for December, I believe. The financials were included in your meeting package, and I think Mr. Freund is with us for the city.
I am here. Good morning, Secretary Beckham and members of the Marb.
Good morning, Julian.
And you are correct. This month's report is as of the end of December, so period 6 of our fiscal year. And as of the end of December, we are projecting an end of year deficit of 4.8 million. This is a slight reduction to the projected deficit from the last time we met, which was actually the meeting on the period 4 report for October. So just a slight change in the overall projection compared to the last report that we met to discuss. At this time, we're not projecting any variance in revenues yet. So all of the variance, that full 4.8 million of unfavorability, is on the expenditure side. For revenues, as of the end of December, we'd collected 54% of our budgeted revenues. This compares to 55.9% for the same period last year. And property taxes, which makes up just over half of our revenues, we were at 58.5% of budget compared to just shy of 58% for the same period last year. Where we are seeing a little bit of significant difference from last year, the same period, is in licenses and permits, is about $4.6 million less than the same period last year. And that's attributable largely to some very large permit fees we collected on a major project at the Children's Hospital last year. You may recall that we overachieved in licenses and permits by several $1 million by year end. And there also is a little bit of a lag in the permit fees as they're reflected in Munis. We go from we use a different system for the invoicing and billing of those fees. And there is a bit of a lag before those fees are reflected in Munis. So overall, in permits and licenses, we're projecting to hit our budgeted amount. Intergovernmental, which is almost entirely state aid payments to the city, is at 50% of the budget compared to about 52% same period last year. Again, that's attributable to a one-time supplement that we received in last year's budget on the municipal revenue sharing program. So again, with state aid, we're fully expecting that we'll hit our budgeted amount there. And we typically begin to show favorability in our revenue accounts once we've hit our budgeted amount. So I'm expecting it'll be another period or two before we start to show the favorability or exceeding our budgeted revenues in any of these categories. On the expenditure side, our expenditures at the end of December, 44.1% of budget. That compares to 42.7% for the same period last year. Our unfavorability in the expenditures is in part in payroll. Payroll overall is about 680,000 unfavorable, and that's the net effect of our vacancy savings and our overtime projections. It's actually an improvement of about 1.2 million compared to the last time we met. And again, that's consistent with the way we report our vacancy savings incrementally throughout the year. So those numbers tend to improve with each month that we report. Offsetting that is a projection in our health insurance category. We're now projecting that we could go over by about $1 million. That's based entirely on the claims activity that we're seeing. So we're minding that very closely. But that's why we're seeing very little change from that one report to this one, is with the health insurance claims projection offsetting much of the improvement in the payroll category. So that hits the highlights. I'll pause there and answer any questions if there are any.
Questions from the board? Okay, don't see any. Why don't you proceed, Julian?
I'm sorry, that concludes my overview of the
Oh, that
monthly
concludes.
report. Yes.
Then let's get to the Board of Ed to provide their update. Is Ms. Richard available?
Yes, and good morning, everyone. I'm Caitlin Richard. I'm the new CFO for Hartford Public Schools, and I started back in December.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you all. Most recently was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, working for Tulsa Public Schools as the budget director there. and previously worked as a consultant working with school districts across the country on resource use. So very excited to be here and have been diving straight into budget development season. You all have the report that we sent. I am going to share my screen with just a few slides that cover some of the key points of our December monthlies. So give me one moment just to pull that up. Sec. Is everyone able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go over our December monthlies and just give an update on our overall deficit projection for FY25. So going into just executive summary, overall, our budget for FY25 is about 55 million less than FY24. That's just important to keep in mind as we go through the monthlies. We're expected to see lower spending, and a lot of that was the cuts that BOE made last year, especially with the loss of federal COVID relief funding. We are anticipating right now a $4 to $6 million deficit in the FY25 budget. I will cover specifically what is driving that in a few slides. But overall, when we look at December, we've spent about 11 million less than last year at this time. I'll get into the specifics of that. It's largely driven by salaries, which was anticipated due to reductions in positions and vacancies, and then also some non-salary expenses, which I will get into more detail around. So we're using this to make that deficit projection for this year, but also to inform our budget for next year. This is just showing the overall trend where you can see the blue line is this year and the yellow line is the previous fiscal year. Everything past December is a projection at this point, but it's just meant to show we are anticipating to spend less than last year. And you can see in December, you are seeing that lower spend. I will say there isn't much difference, and I looked at this historically for BOE over time in terms of spend in the early months of the year, so around that first half of the year, largely because tuition payments, which are like 30% of the budget, don't happen until the second semester. And so that's when you start to see more variation between fiscal years is when tuition payments are happening. So we do expect to see lower spending over time in this fiscal year compared to last based on our projection. In terms of the specific categories in which we're seeing a difference, you can see those first two categories are salaries and both certified and non-certified. You'll see the blue is last year, orange is this year. We've spent, as of December, about 6 million less on salaries. Again, this is due to reductions that were made to positions and the cuts that happened this year and the vacancies we're experiencing. We're also spending less on contracted services. This is largely because the federal COVID relief funding was funding a lot of those types of contracts, and a lot of those went away in this year without that fund source. We're spending slightly more in the supplies and materials category, and that includes utilities. So we are seeing higher utilities than last year, and also than we projected, which I'll talk about in just a minute. You'll also see a difference in the fringe. That's in that sundry category. This is actually, it wouldn't make sense that we're seeing lower salaries, but higher in the fringe category. That really is just a timing difference of how certain things are being coded. And so that piece is less of a insight in our overall spend and more just a timing difference that will even out over the course of the year. So those are some of the specific categories in which we're seeing differences this year compared to last year, largely in line with what we would expect with some of the reductions that were made in the budget. When we get to the projected deficit, so these are just the unanticipated adds to the budget or unrealized revenue, and then I will get into the unanticipated savings. So this slide is just unanticipated adds or unrealized revenue. There's some specifics here. I'll talk through the biggest categories. One is around projected tuition is about 6 million higher than budgeted. This I'll name is related to special education tuition and is less about the number of students who are in those programs and more about increases just to the per pupil tuition amounts, which is a trend we've been seeing over time. And so we do want to make sure we account for that in next year's budget. Two other pieces related to unrealized revenue. There were plans to use some of that federal COVID relief, the ESSER funding this year. That was actually all exhausted in the last fiscal year, and so was unavailable this year to support certain investments. Similar to the non-lapsing fund, that was also planned to be used to cover certain investments, but was unavailable due to unanticipated use of it for FY24. And then, like I mentioned, the increase in projected utility costs is over $1 million. Those are the biggest categories. You can see some of those were unanticipated. Other items you see in here were some deliberate decisions just around needing to recruit teachers given the vacancies that we're seeing. And so signing bonuses around that, teachers and paraeducators. But the biggest amounts really are in that unrealized revenue and then in the tuition projection. When we look at the other side of the equation, we do think a lot of this is solved for through one, vacancy savings being higher than projected. So we've been tracking actual vacancies, and vacancies the rate has been higher than it was in the past year. So this is a struggle we've been having because obviously we want those numbers to be zero, and we want to make sure there's all of our teacher allocations are filled and our paraprofessionals, but that has been an area of struggle. And so we do anticipate seeing higher vacancy savings than projected based on the numbers that we have actually, and this is as of February. So we're tracking that on a monthly basis. And I will say part of the work around the new contracts in raises for staff, particularly for teachers, is to combat this very issue. And so we are anticipating for next year having fewer vacancies. But as of right now, that is the reality in our budget is greater vacancies than we anticipated. And there are some areas where there is additional revenue compared to what was anticipated. So both in the magnet operating grant, so what we get for non-Hartford resident students who attend our magnet schools, and then the excess cost grant, which is for special education students, are higher than what we budgeted for. We're still tracking this because we don't have final numbers on that piece, but we do think we're going to get additional revenue beyond what we had originally projected. So those two slides together net to about 4 to 6 million in that projected deficit for this year. And this is something that we're continuing to monitor as we update these numbers. And the last piece, oh, sorry.
I guess I had a question about the last point you made.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're anticipating additional revenue. What is that about?
So that is essentially, it's additional revenue beyond what we projected. And so in the estimates we have for what we will be receiving, both in the magnet operating grant, so again, for non-Hartford resident students attending Hartford magnet schools, that number is coming in higher than what was in the budget. And same with the excess cost grant. It's the same dynamic of we had budgeted for a certain amount, but what we're seeing in the numbers coming back is that it's likely to be higher than what we had budgeted for.
Caitlin, can I jump in to clarify something?
Yeah, please.
I just wanted to clarify on the excess cost projection there. It's higher because our level of student need is higher, and we project based on the percentage of need we received last year. It is not accounting for anything relative to activity of the legislature this week.
Correct.
Mr. Foster knew where I was going.
Yeah, nothing is in there for anything that has been happening this week. Although I will name if something like that were to go through, because we've looked at the governor's budget and for FY27, it would probably mean around $4 million for Hartford Public Schools. Any other questions before I go over the last piece?
Looks like you're good.
Great. So I just wanted to highlight one piece. We did hire a grants manager, which we're really excited about. This was a role I understand to have existed several years ago, and then with cuts had been eliminated, but really had been a gap for the team because there are so many different sources of grant funding. And so these are just some of the pieces of what having this role will enable us to do, of really being able to track across all of our grants, know who the owners of it are, monitoring spend down, and making sure everything is accurate in our financial system. So I just wanted to highlight we're really excited that we've had our grant manager start, and so that we can get more efficient related to our grants monitoring. Pause there. That concludes my presentation. Any other questions that haven't been raised yet?
Mr. Hamilton.
Yes, thank you. So welcome to the Hartford Public Schools and to our fun meetings with the Marb.
Thank you.
I guess my question is, in past years, the school district had these sort of extra buckets, if you will, of funds that they could draw down on, the extra ESSER money and the non-recurring fund and so on, so that we all knew sort of at the end of the day, they were going to be able to end the year out with balanced operations. And so my question is, and I don't know if you've had enough time to really get your hands on this yet, but how likely do you think you'll be able to do that again this year versus having to take some more extraordinary action, whether it means really drastic cuts toward the end of the year or ending the year with a deficit and asking the city of Hartford to fill the gap. So can you give us kind of your sense as to how likely you think it is that you'll fully close the deficit?
Yeah, I can speak to this and then I will have Paul just jump in from a historical perspective because I think you're right in that there aren't certain funds available that were in prior fiscal years like ESSER. And like I mentioned, using the non-lapsing fund in the past year. And so we've been monitoring this because again, we have made updates related to tracking those vacancies, making sure there's not any, what can we cut from kind of any unnecessary expenditures that haven't happened yet at this point in the year. But I think outside of that, it's not clear if there are any other fund sources we can draw on outside of the city. And so we have raised this issue when we've been meeting with city officials. We did have a couple calls just to go over, in general, some of the historical data, but this particular problem, and then what that looks like in our budget for next year to signal that. But I don't know, Paul, if you would weigh in on anything else we've been thinking about.
No, I mean, in terms of the question of like likelihood of being able to close it ourselves, we don't have any real cushion in the sense that we use all but 600,000 of the non-lapsing fund to balance fiscal 24, and that's not replenished. And so that 600,000 is the cushion. And so we really, it becomes a question of either reduced expenses higher than, even higher than what Caitlin already shared, vacancy savings or other expenditure reductions between now and the end of the year. That would, those would be the means we would have available to close that remaining 4 to 6 million Caitlin talked about.
Mr. Hamilton.
So if Julian is still on the line, I guess I have sort of a follow-up question for Julian, and maybe he can comment a little bit more in terms of your projection. Again, historically with Hartford, you've always been very conservative on your revenue projections until much later in the fiscal year, and then revenues have historically, greatly exceeded your budget projection, and you've ended the year with, surpluses year after year. Right now, I think you're not projecting any shortfall on the city side from the Board of Education, but you are projecting a shortfall of 4.8 million or something on the city side. I'm presuming that you're expecting, absent a call from the Board of Ed, that they're going to need $4 to $6 million, that you think you're probably going to end with a surplus on the city side. But can you confirm that for us? And if you have any projection as to how large that might be, or what your thinking is in terms of dealing with the potential shortfall coming from the Board of Ed.
Yeah, I can't confirm a specific projected surplus at this point. I think we're still working on, pinpointing how close or how much of that gap the Board of Ed is going to be able to close on their own. And it's really a matter of, at this point, monitoring it regularly and updating our projections, regularly as we do. I don't have a projected surplus in mind to say this is how much of a gap we're capable of closing at this point. like I said, I do think that, within the next period or two, that we would be, we'd be able to make better projections on how much we can exceed revenues and property taxes, and probably also our interest earnings. And I do anticipate that over the course of the year, we will, as we have in the past, close that gap on our expenditure side. But I don't have I can't quantify for you right now what I think we'd be able to sort of absorb.
Okay, well, I guess I'm just, I think, you are where you are, and, but I do think it bears monitoring on the part of the board here that, for the first time in a number of years, the fiscal operating situation for the city of Hartford as a whole is looking more constrained than it has in the last few years. I just, say let's keep an eye on it.
Other questions for the Board of Ed on their financials for December? All right. Well, why don't we move ahead then? Because Mr. Freund and Ms. Richard and Mr. Foster are still available to talk about the status of their coming budget, the 25-26 budget. Julian, you want to start?
Yes. So we're, developing the budget now. The mayor's recommended budget will be released on March 24th. I think, Mr. Hamilton's comments are, sort of consistent with, our outlook. It's a challenging revenue picture this year. Change in the valuation process for the motor vehicles tax, and we're still kind of winding down tax appeals from prior years. So we don't have large amounts of additional revenue to work with. We're taking a look at the recent bill providing a local option on the valuation and depreciation schedule for motor vehicles. But that's where we are, and we're a little less than a month away from releasing a proposed budget.
And I can
And
share on the
Go ahead,
BOE
Ms. Richard.
side.
Yeah, go ahead.
So right now we're projecting, essentially, if we were to keep all of the same services programs we have now, a $30 million deficit for next year. That's largely driven by increased expenses. So some by the new teacher contract, but really driven by increases to tuition costs for special education. So like I mentioned, that was part of the unexpected gap for this year, but is something we're anticipating to increase next year. Is some of those rising costs alongside items like utilities without a comparable increase in revenue. So only projecting a modest increase in revenue based on the fully funding of the EC. And like I said, that tuition piece really has been, at least in the past 4 years, not additional students who are going to tuition-based programs, but really the per pupil cost of tuition has been rising pretty significantly. So we've projected that $30 million deficit and are working right now with the board, with the community, with school teams to look at mitigation strategies for that. So it's partly been some of the advocacy work we've been doing around the revenue and some of those pieces outside of our locus of control, but also, what we need to do within our own budget. And so we've been looking at specific areas of reduction to try to solve that $30 million deficit. And our timeline, so we've started that work, are continuing to engage the board, school teams, community in that, with the Board of Education voting on a proposed budget on April 15th.
Questions from the board concerning their 25-26 budget? We also have a status report on labor contracts from the city and the BOE. Mr. Freund?
Yes, we have 2 contracts that are currently in negotiations. We have the fire union and local 1716, which is comprised mostly of public works employees, also our dispatchers, and a handful of other positions. So negotiations continue for both. We've had 7 meetings each, with both groups, and we have one additional scheduled meeting with each. And we will keep you updated on progress.
Julian, I assume you guys do what we do at the state is you go ahead and you assume there's going to be some number you're going to have to hit in your budget and you build that in.
Yes.
You know, it's in our reserve for salary adjustment accounts. You must have a similar.
Yeah, similar approach.
Okay. Ms. Richard?
I can actually speak to
Go ahead.
Bargaining.
Yep.
So as you all know, we've already settled with our teachers and our administrators, which are two of our largest groups. We are currently, our secretaries union, which is a pretty small unit, ratified a new contract on Monday. So we anticipate bringing that to share with the Marb in March. Para-educators and security officers are currently under negotiation. We're meeting with paras tomorrow and twice this month. I'm hopeful by the end of February, we'll have reached an agreement with paras. Their contract actually expired last June 30. So increases for 24-25 would be retro, which will have, we account for it in our budget, but we'll have some implications obviously in our budget. Security officers were not as far along. We've had a couple of meetings. We have 2 scheduled this month. And then we're about to start negotiations with 3 units that have contracts expiring June 30, 25. That's health professionals, early childhood educators, and custodial food service and tradespeople. And so obviously our biggest units are teachers, administrators, and paraeducators. So those have the biggest budget implication. We have 2 down and 1 to go on those 3.
Questions for the city of Hartford on their finances, their budget, and their labor contracts? Anyone out there? Well, Ms. Richard, I'm glad you're here. I am sure the differences between Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Hartford, Connecticut are rather considerable in many, many ways. But you guys, you have a big job there now, and you do, as you've just told us, have some structural deficit issues. And I wish you the very best, because the more success you have on that, you're going to make my job considerably easier. Mr. Freund and Mr. Foster can tell you where I'm coming from on that. So I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, and nice to meet everyone.
All right, well, we'll move on then to the city of West Haven, who I assume are waiting patiently to get started. They're not on my first page here. Let's see. There they are. I see them around the table. So on the West Haven section, if the board will indulge me, I think there's a better flow to all these items if we start a little differently. I'm going to propose to start with the monthly financials, move through their status of their upcoming budget, get an update from Whittlesey and Protivity, and then move into the bond anticipation note issue. Let the mayor tell us where she thinks things are, and then let's move into the audit report and the subcommittee discussion about the criteria for exit. That's my thought for the flow run of show today, unless people have an objection to that. We're good? I'm getting a lot of, okay. Let's then start with the city monthly financials. If Mr. Gormany or Mr. Taylor are ready, tell us about their December financials.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'll be brief. There was not a lot of change in the city's monthly financial reports from the month of November to the month of December. We've seen really good tax collections come in for the city, which is the primary revenue generator on the city's general fund. On the expense side, we continue to monitor overtime versus vacancies and any contractual increases that may occur during the fiscal year. On the general fund, we're still projecting a surplus through December. Again, as everyone knows, that's an estimate at that period in time. Things fluctuate through the year, but we're still in a good financial position on the general fund. Allentown Fire District continues to trend in a very good direction. We're possibly looking at a surplus again this year for Allentown Fire District, which in the past couple of years, we put the surplus towards paying down their pension liabilities, and we continue to monitor the city sewer fund. So that's our update for the month of December. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the board for the city for the December financials. Okay, then we can talk to the Board of Ed. I believe a new face there, Kimberly Kinsella, is that right?
That's correct. Can you hear me?
Yes,
No.
welcome.
Okay, good. Okay, so I started in January and I'm still analyzing everything and learning how things work here. I came from the town of Stratford. I also worked at Cooperative Educational Services in Trumbull, and I also worked in the city of Bridgeport, so I have a long history. And I put together the report as Matt has done in the past through December, and we're starting to catch up now. We had some technical glitches, if you would, regarding encumbrances. So the next report will be much more accurate to the time frame. We've also, the Board of Ed has also submitted their budget request for next year. They're asking for a 3.82% increase. So we'll see how that goes.
Questions for the Board of Ed for their monthly financials?
Yes, Secretary.
Go ahead, Ms. Kennison.
When you said you mentioned about getting caught up, if we look at your December numbers, they definitely are showing that they're lagging. If we look at it from a payroll perspective, I would have normally assumed that you might have been at a spend rate of about 50%, and it's showing that you're around 25% at this time. So when you say getting caught up, are you referring to entries that have not been posted into the system yet?
My microphone.
Did you hear me, Kimberly?
I heard you, but can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. It has a little X on the microphone, so I didn't know if it was on or not. Yes, I believe that what happens here is the entries are made on the city side. And there's some that the account numbers are kicking back rejects. So the accountant was going to send me a list so I can review them and update the account numbers, and then they will get posted.
Michael, are you familiar with that?
Yes, we're familiar with that. We sent Kim the list of account numbers. Our senior accountant sent everything to the Board of Education, so we're just waiting.
I haven't received that.
Yeah.
I haven't received it from Michelle.
All right.
I'll let you work through that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hamilton.
Yes, thank you. Question for you, Kimberly. The auditors in their most recent state single audit actually have a recommendation relative to staffing in the Board of Education. And I noticed in the backup material for this meeting that, when Matt announced his resignation, he essentially announced that there would, be only emergency spending would be authorized until his position was backfilled. And the auditors had identified that essentially there's only one finance position in the Board of Education, which I guess is you. And so my question is, you had made reference to a budget that the Board of Education is working on. Is that an issue that is being addressed or proposed to be addressed in next year's budget in terms of staffing in the finance department? Because to me, for a education system as large as the city of West Haven, to have one person in the finance department seems quite thin, and obviously presents internal control issues just on its face when you've only got one person who's essentially doing everything.
Well, there's myself as the finance director, and then there are two staff members who do accounts payable, and then there's a payroll person. So there's actually 4 people in finance. I'm learning the job and I will make recommendations as I see fit. Neil did say that we could possibly hire an assistant if I felt that we needed one. And again, I'm new, so I want to assess everything first before I make big changes.
Okay.
Okay, so, but
Mr.
you're
Hamilton?
saying there are actually 4 people, 4
In the
employees
finance
total
department.
in the
Correct.
Board of Ed Finance Department. Okay,
Correct.
okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
Other questions of either the city or the board concerning the December financials? We were also then looking for an update on the upcoming budget. I think Ms. Kinsella alluded to a little bit of that. Mr. Gormany, do you have a status update for where you are on your budget?
But
Want me to take it?
no, so we're currently we started our budget process. The budget is due by the 3rd Thursday in March to the city council. We're currently reviewing all the operating and capital requests for the city, including what was submitted by the Board of Education. So we're currently reviewing all our revenue assumptions and expenditure assumptions, and should have something to the city council by the mandated charter date.
Questions from the board? Ms. Kinsella, do you have anything to add on the Board of Ed side?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Well, seeing no hands raised from our board, we'll move on then to the Tier 4 action plan update. The organizational assessment by Whittlesey, they're finalizing their phase 2 and 3 reports for distribution in March. The reports relate to governance, to the tax collector and tax assessor, to tax filings, to the hiring employment practices, to grants management, to expenditure analysis. And the draft forms of these reports were discussed at a prior Marb meeting in executive session. Whittlesey is currently performing an information technology validation audit that is scheduled to be completed next month. Do we have other information, staff, Ms. Kinnison, about all of that?
No, you have, you've updated it, all of the details that we have. Thank you.
Questions from the board on that item? Okay, we can talk about the finance manager summary productivity. Copy of their status report as of the middle of this month was provided for members. Do members have questions, comments, or concerns about where the finance manager is?
And Protivity is with us today if you did.
I don't see any. So we're going to move ahead then back to sub A, which is the refunding of issuance of, I'm sorry, Mr.
Mr.
Gormany.
Secretary?
Yep, Mr. Gormany, go ahead.
Thank you. I just, before we move on from Protivity, I know that they provided a summary, but there was a question in the subcommittee about our bank reconciliations, and I thought because they're present on the line right now and they have been tracking that, if they could, just as part of their summary, just point to that one issue without going through their whole tracker, but I'd like to hear from them what their tracker says about our bank reconciliations.
Is Protivity on the line?
We are, sir, yes.
Can you speak to the mayor's question?
We can, yes. It was a conversation in the subcommittee. Our tracker, I believe, reflects exactly what was discussed in the subcommittee meeting from the city side, that this is an item related to bank recs, which was a previous material weakness. It was downgraded, per our understanding, in the last audit to an SD. And I believe our tracker does correctly reflect that. We expect it's been cleared at this point, but it's subsequent to the audit opinion that the auditor would have issued.
Okay. Questions from the board on that point or any others? Well, we're obviously going to talk about the subcommittee just deliberations in a minute. Okay. Anything else before we move on then I want to go back to the review, discussion, possible action on the bond resolution, issuance of bonds and bond anticipation notes. Okay, so the city is planning to issue $12,450,000 in long-term general obligation bonds and $5,030,000 in short-term bond anticipation notes on March 27, 2025. City Council at its January 27 meeting approved the bond ordinance authorizing the bonds to fund the fiscal year 23-24 capital budget. City is seeking approval to issue these bonds and bond anticipation notes. This transaction was discussed at our Marb meeting in January. Mr. Gormany and Mr. Lindsay will be reviewing these bonds and issuance for the board. Any further? Did I miss anything, Mr. Gormany?
I also believe Bill Lindsay is with us today.
Yep. I think Mr. Gormany's muted. Hello? Are they frozen?
They had some audio issues in our prior meeting as well.
They appear to be frozen. Maybe they should go out and come back. Questions from the board? Maybe the staff can answer any questions about the bond issuance or the.
I would ask John Mayer too, if Mr. Lindsay is not available to discuss.
I'm here, Kim. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Oh, Mr. Lindsay, go ahead.
Thank you, please.
Yeah. So as the secretary pointed out, we did discuss this at the January meeting. What's changed since that point in time is that the city council has successfully adopted the bond resolution for their 23-24 capital budget in the amount of $12,450,900. And so, as we discussed back in January, the plan is to issue long-term bonds with final maturity of 20 years in the end of March. It's a bit of a blended amortization based on the useful life of the projects. There are a number of different projects, including technology, and vehicles which have a shorter useful life. So the amortization is blended. I believe that was included in my memo, where you can get a sense of what that amortization looks like. In addition to the 12.45 million of bonds, the city will be rolling over the current bond anticipation notes that are roughly $5 million. As a reminder, those were for the retainage portion of the high school project. And so they'll be rolling those over for 12 months until next March. Happy to report that, again, the budget impact, or the impact, I should say, for the 5-year recovery plan was included in my memo and, remains favorable. We do have credit rating calls scheduled for tomorrow, and so we're cautiously optimistic that we'll have favorable review with Moody's in particular, working to try to get that credit rating increased, given the recent improvements with the city and their financial situation.
That would be great. Questions from the board concerning this set of bond transactions, which I assume, Kim, we have to vote to approve?
We do. I do have one question, if you don't mind, Secretary.
Yeah, go ahead.
Bill, when we look at the new updated figures that have come out and you're saying that they're favorable, is the favorability coming from the interest that is being delayed in that payment, or no, it is not?
No, it is not. It is indeed related to the interest. I believe Mr. Hamilton asked a question around this back in January. What it really is it reflects the improvement in the city's bond rating from Standard & Poor's. You may recall Standard & Poor's has raised the city's bond rating 2 notches from BBB to A-, and that's really what's driving the reduction in the interest cost.
Thank you. That's helpful to understand.
Other questions or comments concerning the bond transactions? Sounds like we'll need a motion to approve.
Motion.
Have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. All right. I'm going to let the mayor do her executive summary at this point, if she's would like to. And I do have a question about, I'm told there was a ransomware situation that occurred over Christmas. Was that resolved?
All right. Yes. Are you looking for my mayor executive summary update, or are you looking?
Yes,
for
ma'am.
my feedback? Okay. All right. Okay. And yes, there was, there was a breach of our data, but unlike in the previous year, our system was backed up. Last time there was encryption of our data, and the city did pay a ransom to unencrypt it. But our system is backed up daily now. So while we were asked, we don't want to talk about it too much in public, but while we were asked for a payment, we did not oblige.
Okay. Do you have other matters you want to tell us about in your executive summary section?
Yeah, sure. And I will, I have a lot to update you on, but I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. And so we could spend a little time talking about our West Haven status. Starting off, we're very pleased with economically how things are moving and happening. First, the boarded up eyesore hotel called the Debonair, which you've heard about, was finally sold, and it's slated to be demolished in April or May. Our economic team did a great job bringing this sale and this movement to fruition. There's going to be 30 condominiums that are built there. This is helping to finalize these renaissance, we call it, of Beach Street. And it was a great springboard for economic development along our shoreline. The Kelsey, which, as you know, is that, the old brewery project, we have overcome every hurdle. It is moving forward. It is slated to open 2026. The Riva, which was also approved, that is on Beach Street. They are moving along. We have worked with them, and they are slated to open no later than June 1st. Style School, that story. Put it out to bid a few times. We selected a purchaser, a buyer, for about $420,000 for the sale of that building. It is going before a public hearing. It is gone to the city council. That also is going to be 30 units. That's in the TOD district. And I just want to mention that when I talk about these units, they're market rate units. And not only are we getting revenue from the sale, but for all of these projects, we instituted for the first time a sewer hookup fee. The city of West Haven never had a sewer hookup fee like other cities, $3,500 per residential unit. So now every time we have one of these projects, we get an additional $100,000 for the sewer hookup, plus the building fees, plus these buildings now become revenue drivers. So that is a good project. We've also selected a consultant for our downtown evaluation project. That was that $250,000 grant that we got through SIF that you all approved. We went through an RFP and picked Collier, who will be coming in and helping us map out the future of our downtown. We selected a project manager for the building known as the Masonic Temple. It's a non-performing city-owned asset that we will be rehabilitating through a state grant that we had, a state bonding that we had gotten a few years ago. We also undertook a good revision of our zoning changes to clarify for our investors and our developers. There was a lot of things we needed to clean up, and we heard a lot of feedback about just, improving our zoning. So that was voted on unanimous by the zoning board. Tomorrow, there's going to be a vote by the board at the University of New Haven for a request that I proposed to them that I believe is equitable and will assist with our bottom line. We have had similar conversations with Yale University. Both universities are very open to assisting West Haven a little more. We enjoy being host to these world-class universities, but we also provide a service at an increasing cost. And we think there's an opportunity for an improved partnership there. Just as a reminder, West Haven surprisingly has a very high percentage of non-taxable property. We not only have a good footprint of Yale University, we have Yale Hospital, we have University of New Haven, but we have the VA hospital here as well. And that does not come with federal funding. Fortunately, we get state pilot, but we have a very large hospital in the middle of our city that we do not get funding from. So we're trying to work every aspect we can to try to make up for the shortfall that we don't get in taxes. We've been spending a lot of time on our security and our emergency preparedness, a lot of policies that were not in place, and a lot of plans that weren't submitted to the state of Connecticut that we have now caught up 3 years of plans that were due. Spending a lot of time working on our flooding and our stormwater system. It's a very archaic infrastructure, which is presenting challenges for us, but we've used that ARPA money wisely to really make a difference. Finances, you just heard from Michael. You're going to hear from our auditors. Bonding, as you heard from Bill. We've had those 2 significant upgrades and a lot of great feedback from the bonding agencies. And last but not least, I know it's not a financial issue or a governance issue, but we've invested a lot in giving the city what we would call as a facelift, beautifying, because all of these things that we talk about and we work on are behind the scenes and they're very critical, but our residents don't necessarily see them. So we want to make sure we're very visible out there and we're doing things that are positive, and I feel there is a very positive vibe in the city. With that, I'm just going to pause, see if you have any questions for me.
Questions from the board? Well, thank you for that, Mayor. We'll then move into the audit report section. Marb members should have received copies of the City of West Haven's June 30, 2024 audited financial reports. The city filed the financial reports on February 14th, but we are waiting for the auditor's management letter. Mr. Centofanti, I believe, is available to provide an overview.
All right. I think you had the presentation, but I was asked to kind of just hit the highlights, so I'm not really going to go page by page. We can come back to whatever you want to come back to. So most importantly, the opinion on the financial statements was unmodified. General fund and positive operations of 6.4 million. That came from 2 different areas. Positive revenue variances about 2.4, and under positive expenditure variance is about 4 million. So that pushed the unassigned fund balance from 8.97% up to 12.48%. Another highlight is that OPEB trusts were established for both the city and Allentown. So at least that ball can get rolling, and there's no actual evaluation for estimated contribution. So now if the trust funds are set up, we should start seeing a recommended contribution to fund it at a higher level than what's been in the budget. Internal service funds funding, both the workers' comp and the general liability are now have a current ratio above 1, so enough assets to at least pay the current liabilities. For workers' comp, part of that was a $2 million contribution, additional contribution to get that at least in a good stable financial position. Allentown operations last year will break even after the $1.1 million additional pension contribution, as was mentioned earlier. Sewer fund was break even for the year. The pension funds had an increase of the police plan of 5.3% up to 76.39% funded. And Allentown had an increase of 8.21% up to 47.38% funded. The OPEB trust funds again were set up, and because there was a trust, there was a significant decrease in the liability, even though the funding still has to happen. For the police plan, the liability went down by 70.5 million. A lot of that was the discount rate and then some other factors. And Allentown's liability went down by 3.2 million. Looking at the federal and state, the yellow book, as mentioned earlier, that the material weaknesses were removed. And then one of them, the bank recs was downgraded to significant deficiency. based upon the timing of the correction of that process. For federal single audit, unmodified opinion, no findings or question costs. For state single audit, unmodified opinion and no question costs. If there were 3 compliance findings, 2 repeated from last year, and 1 additional one this year related to Medicaid, just due to the reporting, the reimbursement reporting. As far as recommendations, significant progress was made. So there were 16 comments that were resolved, and so from last year, and there was three new comments. So a net of 13. So as soon as we have a conversation with the city, that should hopefully be filed no later than sometime next week. So just we're waiting to have that call to go over any questions, and then that will be filed. But definitely significant progress was made, both material weaknesses and a lot of the other recommendations. So that's it at a very high level.
Thank you. Mr. Gormany, forgive my ignorance. What involvement does the city have with Medicaid?
So this was really on the Board of Education side.
Okay.
They're really involved on the Medicaid side, so there's some reporting in other areas that they have to do.
What Medicaid covered expenditures do they make at the BOE? Is this some kind of healthcare provision for?
It's related to special ed students. There's some reimbursement that's connected to that.
Through Medicaid?
Through Medicaid, yes. There's something that gets filed, a big report that gets filed with DSS, and there's some reimbursements related to that.
Okay. Mr. Hamilton has a question.
Yes, thank you. So, Joe, the compliance findings, I think you said there were 3 compliance findings, 2 of which were repeated from the prior year. Can you identify what those 2 were that were repeated, and just tell us a little bit more about them?
So the first one was a community conservation grant. It's just the filing of a report that it's required as part of the grant that status reports get filed, and so it wasn't filed again for 24. The second one was school readiness. So that comment was for subrecipient monitoring. Again, this is on the education side. So most of that half of that was corrected. So they are doing monitoring, but it was all really program, and in the financial monitoring, we didn't have any evidence that they were doing the financial monitoring part. So we'll say that one was kind of half corrected, but the financial monitoring, there's also a recommendation. That's one of the new recommendations to kind of focus on just to document exactly what they're doing for that process.
Okay, great. And with respect to the significant deficiency, that was the bank reconciliation not being performed on a timely basis. Can you tell us can you tell us when you understand those bank recs were done for fiscal year 24, and then your understanding of when the issue was corrected, if it was corrected?
Well, as part of, if you remember, the 23 audit was issued in May of 24. So based upon us being involved in auditing that late, we were aware that we were waiting on June 30, 23 bank recs. So 24 bank recs weren't being done because 23 bank recs weren't done. So based upon that timing, the condition existed in the audit period. So I don't know that I have an exact date. I think it was corrected after year end, because in May they were catching up, and I think when we looked at some information, it was after year end, it was more timely. But just based upon last year's audit, the 23 audit, it was evident that wasn't being done in the period, but they had put in procedures late to catch up. And I think another part of the comment relates to the Board of Ed student activities, which we don't get that information till 5-6 months after year end. So, and based upon the data they gave us, it was pretty clear that the reconciliations were not being done timely for student activity accounts.
Okay, so just to be clear now, the bank rec comment being a significant deficiency, that was not exclusively the bank recs related to student activities, correct? That was bank recs related to general ledger of the city itself. Is that correct?
It is right. It relates to both. I think that the finding that you'll see a piece that relates to education too, to make it clear. I think that was a new addition to it, just based upon the timing, because with a lot of processes moving faster, it becomes clear that things are not done.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions concerning the audit from the board? Mr. Alvarez.
And this should be quick, but just for my understanding, essentially the reason that significant deficiency was found was because they were catching up on the fiscal year 23 audit. So the time to remedy that fell into fiscal year 24. It has since been corrected, but it occurred after year end. That's an accurate description.
Yeah, from an internal control perspective, if the control is not functioning in the audit period, then I have to report.
Gotcha.
That it's not functioning in the period we're auditing. It can't be all catch up.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Other questions concerning the audit? All right. Well, we'll thank Mr. Centofanti for his labors. I want to hang around for a few minutes, sir. There may be additional questions when we get to the next section. So the subcommittee for West Haven has met a couple times since our last board meeting. And in fact, I think they met this morning. Is there someone from the subcommittee who can report out the deliberations of the subcommittee?
Yes, I've asked Tom Hamilton to do so today, Secretary.
Mr. Hamilton, you've been voluntold
Okay,
by staff
yeah,
to
right. I will try my best, Mr. Secretary. We had a very robust discussion, and we didn't come to any unanimous sort of conclusions. So reporting out is, certainly to the extent I don't capture a point that somebody on the subcommittee felt was important, then obviously there'll be an opportunity for everyone to, at this meeting, I assume, to make sure that gets captured as well. I think first and foremost, we have to say that the subcommittee is, certainly believes that West Haven has made tremendous progress, especially under the leadership of Mayor Borer, that it's very clear in the last, 18 months that this city has really moved from a place of crisis to one where it's, doing quite well financially. The results of their financial results are extremely positive, and we went through the criteria that were laid out in statute. That there's 5 different criteria that were reviewed. The audit criteria have now been fully met, so that there have not been any operating deficits for 2 consecutive years. And they've got a fund balance in excess of the 5% minimum. Their bond rating is investment grade, and in fact is, now as we heard, A- by Standard & Poor's, which, places it well above investment grade. In terms of their financial plan, they've met now all of the requirements that the statute laid out relative to their financial plan, and being based on recurring revenues and positive fund balances, and properly accounting for any restructuring funds they receive. So it's really only in the final criteria of financial practices that there is, still some level of debate, if you will, and disagreement, perhaps among different board members. So I think it's fair to say that different board members, have slightly different positions on whether or not they've met this criteria. The mayor has made her case, I think, very strongly that she believes that the city has met all of the criteria necessary to be released from Tier 4. And really, we centered in on a few issues. The OPM staff provided us with a list of 6 different areas of consideration that we looked at, and I think the first and one that we all agreed, but it becomes then a definitional issue, is that the audit findings need to show that the city doesn't have any evidence of unsound or regular financial practices. And how the question becomes, how do you define that? And some of us felt that given the fact that the most recent state and federal audit report that we just received from the auditors indicates that there was, or there is, as of the June 30th, 2024 audit period, still one significant deficiency, being the bank reconciliations, that's evidence that there is still an unsound financial management practice. On the other hand, the city has presented evidence and from Protiviti, which we heard during the discussion today, that practice has been corrected since the audit period. So it becomes a question as, well, when do you need to see evidence of the unsound financial practice being corrected? Does it need to be as part of the annual audit report and the state single audit, or can it be a subsequent finding from the board's financial manager? So that's an area, I guess, of some disagreement among members of the board. There were other concerns expressed in a variety of areas, and some questions among some board members as to whether or not these whether or not they represent a unsound financial practice. But certain members of the subcommittee have concerns about the fire districts, and in the event that a fire district were unable to continue to perform its services, what would be the city's response to that? What would be the contingency plan in place for that? And so that's sort of an open issue. And then issues about the litigation regarding the police pension plan is also an area of concern for some board members, and I'd say other board members feel perhaps that isn't within the bounds of the criteria that are established in statute. So I'm going to stop there because I think there's opportunity for us to have further discussion here among the full board. So I think in all cases we are, I think, in agreement that West Haven is certainly coming close to the point of being eligible to be released from Marb Tier 4 oversight, but whether or not we're quite there or not, I think is still open to debate.
Thanks, Tom. Well, I have not participated in the subcommittee deliberations, and I think that's good because I think I can now ask some dumb questions and elicit maybe some discussion here. The mayor was involved in the deliberations, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, she was participating in the meeting.
Okay. I think you were just looking at something that everyone has in their packet, and everyone who wants a copy can have it. It's a draft, but we're happy to give it out. It says City of West Haven criteria for Marb determination of sound financial practices. That's that last sort of broad category in the statute. And then it lays out areas for consideration. It says as of 2/19/2025. And Tom just walked us through each of those and indicated where the subcommittee was. So I guess my question is, so on the first one there, the audit findings, and you alluded to when do we get and how do we get the sign off as to, okay, you're clean. Could that be something after the audit period where someone we trust, say the financial manager, does so? Is it my understanding the financial manager earlier today said that it was clean, to put it in vague layman's terms?
Mr. Secretary, we with regard to that significant deficiency item, yes, we're effectively serving as an interim step. Joe and his team have to give an opinion, as he just said, on at a point in time, and we track in that interim period between audit opinions. So yes, that SD we believe was closed in the fall.
Okay. So, Tom, fair to say the board could rely on Protivity's determination that, as far as they can tell, that has been cleared up. Otherwise, we'd have to wait for a fiscal 25 audit, I assume, which would be end of the year at the earliest, correct?
Right. That's how I see it. We either rely on Protivity's analysis, which I don't dispute that it's been corrected. The issue is when the next audit is completed, sometimes there's backsliding on things like this. And, particularly if Protivity is not there on a regular basis, it's possible there could be backsliding. And so the question is, when do you say, okay, we've now got sort of the definitive word, if you will, that the deficiency is corrected and there hasn't been any backsliding. I think certainly if a majority of the board feel, no, we can rely on Protivity, then, I don't think that's an unreasonable position to take either. I think you could take either side of that and still be in the realm of that's a reasonable position.
Yep. So I wonder, how do board members want to proceed? Do you want to go through each one of these items and debate whether or not they should be criteria? Which would be, I guess, one step. And then having established what the criteria is, I guess you could at some point have a debate about whether or not they've met them. Mr. White has a thought.
I have a question also to piggyback off of the.
Yeah, I think that just to move it along, Tom raised, I think, two of the issues that I think sparked the most discussion. That is, how do they provide fire service if one of the districts go under, and the issue of the police pension plan, which has significant consequences beyond the 5-year plan. I think if we focused on that, there may be some other things that pop up, but my head will explode if we go through all these 8 issues, and well, it's really resolved, so I don't know why it's on the list. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, Mr. Alvarez.
I think I'm sort of the mind, and I had mentioned this in the subcommittee, I welcome anybody's thoughts on it, is that we don't necessarily need to be incredibly rigid in adopting a certain set of criteria. Every member of the Marb can sort of assess themselves. I do think that the sort of areas of greatest discussion involved the audit report, the sort of legal case, and then Mr. White's interest, particularly in the fire districts, were the main ones. The only thing that I would additionally just draw attention to that I thought the mayor's response on depending on the list, item 5 or item 6 regarding basically internal controls, I thought her response was quite useful there in demonstrating sort of a change that has occurred from one of the major events that I think drove them into tier 4 status was not having proper controls in place. I think the mayor gave an example of how those controls are in place now. So that's just something that I would say is relevant to consider for members. But I think the main areas of discussion or dispute would be related to the audit and the legal case.
Okay. Kim? Ms. Kinnison?
Yes,
Hello?
yes, sorry. The other thing, while Mr. Hamilton reported out on the significant deficiencies, we would be need to be also mindful of the non-compliance items, because those are true I'm going to still call it high risk areas for it to be repeated findings that have continued. And we do have the auditor here should you want to question that. In addition, we have not received the management letter, so we aren't able to update if he has new findings in his management letter. And the outcomes of that, as Joe mentioned, that will be coming to us next week.
So it sounds like we would need more information on the audit findings. And maybe, I don't know, I'll just leave that as a question. Do members think we need more information on that? Mr. White?
Quite frankly, I think all we need to say is the criteria is that any findings are corrected as verified by the manager. We don't have to get into what they are and whatever. It's just whatever they
Okay.
are. And I'm not one for waiting for the next round, and I don't really remember the debate on that. But I'm quite happy with the manager signing off on whatever they find.
Okay. Other, Mr. Gormany? Or the room there?
Just asking, do you want us to weigh in as you go through the criteria? Do
Sure.
you want us to summarize at the end?
I'm happy to have you participate.
That's great. Thank you. First, I think Mr. Hamilton gave a really good summary of what occurred in the subcommittee. And, somebody mentioned the subcommittee that we don't want to have an adversarial relationship. And certainly, when I question things or I push back a little bit, it's not because anybody here is looking to be adversarial. It's just because we're so passionate about moving our city forward. And there's so much work involved and so much progress we've made. And so we're just trying to state our case. I think that, we are looking at that last criteria, but again, we have to look at the city in totality, which is those main original points that were in the statute that we just heard from. Again, not having any bonding downgrades. We have had two upgrades in 10 months, not having any deficits. We have a very healthy fund balance. We have delivered our timely audits. And the other criteria that's on the original list. So, and then this criterion was added in May. So as you can understand, a little frustrating for us because the statute was updated in May of 2024, and we have been looking for clear direction as to what exactly does that. How do you define that? No unsound financial practice. It talks about high risk. It doesn't talk about timing. When was the last time, there was an unsound financial practice, or what is the criterion? We're still trying to figure that out, which is, difficult for us to follow. But having said that, we do have the couple of points that came up in the subcommittee, and this one that we're speaking of right now with the audit. I agree with Mr. White and Mr. Hamilton that if we don't rely on Protiviti, that means we have to rely on the next round of the audit, which isn't going to be complete until June 30th, 2025, which means that audit's going to come out in December of 2025. So that is a whole year that we would have to wait. Those non-compliance issues were also addressed, and those non-compliance issues are not high risk. They're important. We're going to continue to work on them, of course, like we work on, anything that comes to our attention, we know we have to work on. But those were not identified as high risk. And you all had indicated in the December meeting that you're going to be looking at material weaknesses and significant deficiencies. So I appreciate the issue around non-compliance. But you had indicated to us that you were going to be looking at the top two tiers, and it sounds like we cleared the top two tiers of issues in an audit. So that's just to address the first point in the criteria.
Okay.
I'll speak as we get to the others.
Ms. Hammersley.
Thank you. I guess I kind of agree with what the mayor just stated with regards to the statute and the findings that were presented or found by the auditors. Unfortunately, in audits, you frequently find items of non-compliance. And municipalities are always working to address all of those items of non-compliance. And so when I look at the statute and I look at the findings, in my opinion, and the fact that Protiviti has stated that the significant deficiencies has been addressed, I would rely on Protiviti and their knowledge of what is actually going on in the city of West Haven.
Okay. Mr. Alvarez, I think, is number next.
I believe Sue is before me.
Oh, she was. I'm sorry. The one moves around the screen on me. Ms. Weiselberg.
Thank you. We had some discussion of pension and pension liabilities, and one of the findings or criteria talks about funding employee long-term benefits. And I thought the city made very good points on that. And I have a related question that we may not answer right now, but as the city points out, there are a number of municipalities with unfunded pension liabilities and concerns about long-term benefits, especially because there are always contracts in negotiation. So if that isn't tier 4, are those triggers for municipalities for MFAC, Municipal Finance Advisory Commission, or looking at lower tiers? How are we treating, we don't need a long answer now, how are we treating other municipalities who face these issues? Because I'm not sure we should treat West Haven differently here.
Kim, do we know? That's something we could.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
It could be a number of things when it gets to MFAC, very similar to allowing like this particular board to make the decision of what we feel is unsound as we are working with the city. So the board is able to set that criteria. That board is also aware we have triggers that have to be met for MFAC, which is the first, but it is an advisory board. If they meet one trigger, it doesn't mean they come to MFAC. It's when we start to see a pattern of multiple, when we see a pattern of multiple audit findings, that is a trigger for them to come under the MFAC. Those are examples. So as you talk about liabilities, it could be a attributing factor, but it is not one of their specific criteria.
So Sue, I think you're questioning what's letter number 4 on this list of areas for consideration: funding employee long-term benefits. I note that the text here says we'd have to review their FY26 budget as well as their 5-year plan to see if they had a plan to fund unfunded liabilities, as I understand it. If this were a criteria.
It says beyond because it does connect I wrote it, so I'll make you aware of what I'm trying to bring to your attention. That's what clearly I'm trying to do here, is that when we received the proposal on the police pension, and it is very dated and we have not received updated information that allowed us to get the new amortization schedule that ties with the proposal, all of that should be considered when that mediation is resolved. And again, we can't talk about that here today, but.
All right. So it sounds to me like, so item 3, which is settling the current case, is a short-term, very specific criteria if you chose to have that as one of your criteria. But the next one is really kind of open-ended. We got to review their next budget plus their 5-year plan to make sure they've got a plan for all of their unfunded liabilities, which is a tallish order, I would think. I'm not sure I have a plan for the state to do all of our unfunded liabilities. Just to point that out. Anyway, Mr. Alvarez.
That's my point.
Yeah.
And I think I would echo and agree with that point, Mr. Secretary and Sue. And I also agreed with Ms. Hammersley on it just related to the audit. I don't think that the standard being that we get a new report that says that this has been resolved when we already have somebody that we are contracted with who's reporting that to us. And I think Mr. Santofanti actually stated that himself, which I don't want to put words in his mouth, but if the auditors are saying it and Protiviti is saying it, I think we can be reasonably satisfied that that is resolved. And I think the audit is, in my mind, was the biggest thing to actually demonstrate some evidence that there's unsound or unusual financial practices. The other thing that I just wanted to mention as we weigh this in our minds is what the functional role Marb plays in going forward. Because in looking at all of the different categories under statute, many of those are areas where the Marb had a specific and direct role over the last, I believe, 7 years, where we could take some degree of action that would result in that outcome. In terms of unsound financial practices, I think that has largely been demonstrated by the actions of the new administration in the city, and put in place a large number of controls to make sure that whatever the administration is not going forward with unsound financial practices in the future. I think the reason that I mentioned the sort of fraud prevention and things like that, I think they've put an enormous number of controls in place that make it so that the issues that came up previously will not reoccur. I think the Marb's role has largely been, over the last number of years, have been in those other categories of financial control where we actually were able to exhibit some control, and that was useful to the city. I don't know what actions we could clearly take that would, more than what the city has already done, ensure that unsound financial practices don't take place in the future. Lastly, I do think that this is a pretty significant success story, both from the Marb and all of the work that a lot of OPM staff have done, but particularly the city, the turnaround that has happened. I think some of us are a little bit surprised that we're even having this discussion because of the speed of it, but I think that's a testament to how much work has gone into not only running the city today in a really responsible way from Mayor Borer, but also putting things in place for the long-term future of the city. And so that's why I just wanted to mention those things, because I think that's a very significant part of the relationship between the Marb and the city, is that the city is primarily responsible for a large part of this, and they seem to have taken up that responsibility very clearly.
Thank you. Mr. White is next. And Mr. White, you can speak on any topic you like, but you've been identified as someone as having a special concern about the fire services and a continuity of operations plan. I wonder if you could hum a few bars on that in addition to whatever else you want to say.
Yeah, no, I'll hum along, and we've been with this issue for a long time, and I want to be clear as to what the proposal is and what it isn't. Okay, the city of West Haven, I think, according to our friend Mark Waxenberg, is very unusual in the way its fire is done. The question I have is, if one of those districts becomes unable to provide sufficient fire coverage, what will the city do? I am not asking the city to change the fire districts. They don't have jurisdiction. I'm not asking Marb to change the fire districts. We don't have jurisdiction. But I think it's fair to ask, what will you do if they fail? And that's not a hypothetical question. Allentown failed, and the city bailed them out and took on their debt. We hired a consultant within the first year, and they said, don't do that again. Okay. So I'd like to know what they intend to do. I think, and it's not the kind of thing where we're going to fly spec and you have to make progress. They can do it in 30 days. I've indicated that, early on when we did this, since this involves insolvency, I kind of played around with some things and looked at cases, and I think there's a way, and I'd be willing to talk to their lawyers about it. Again, just my ideas, not the Marb's, and see what they think and get them thinking. My only request is to get the city to think about it and tell us what it's all about. I don't think it's a big deal, but we will be criticized if down the road one of those folks goes under and there's a mess, right? The city has already been under receivership. This is the second time, 7 years and 16 million and counting dollars. The fire issue was something identified early, and we've had it for 7 years, and here's where we are. So I don't think it's unfair. And I think that, I don't want to get into what does the statute say. I think when you have a major service for a city and you delegate that to an entity that is financially unsound, I think that's an unsound financial practice. But I don't want to, fence and what does the word mean and let's go to court. I think they can, if they focus on it, I think in 30 days they can come back with an answer. It may not be perfect, but at least we will have discharged our duty on an issue that's been with us for 7 years. So, I'm kind of looking out for for us, and I don't want to embarrass anybody. So anyway, I've said my piece.
I'm going to go out of order because I saw they put their hand up, but I think it's relevant to the city to speak to what Mr. White just said. So, city, what have you got?
I actually, Mr. Secretary, I think that I keep going back to there's a very specific law as to how you go into the Marb, how you change tiers, and how you come out of the Marb. And this last criteria is, has the city engaged in any unsound financial practice? And I think we should stick within the framework of the law and not go outside of that, because we can come up with other issues outside of that law. And I know you have a lot of legal attorneys on here today. Maybe, you could touch base with them, but I think it's only fair that we stay within the framework of the statute that we have been following all along, and what we've been aiming for.
Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah, so I not sure where to go based on the mayor's comments. I'm probably gonna, step outside it. But the item on our list of areas of consideration, I'm still the most concerned about and a little frustrated because I don't think I can talk about it because it deals with litigation and discussions would probably need to take place in executive session. But this open lawsuit regarding the police pension is, for me, actually the one that has me the most hung up, that I don't really understand where that's going. I don't understand what the cost is if it goes the way that I guess the city and the union have proposed. So I don't really understand the long-term cost implications, and I'm having a hard time getting to the point of saying that's not an unsound financial practice there somehow without some resolution. The other issues, I've heard enough board members that I think enough board members sound like they're okay with relying on Protiviti for saying we're past the issue of a significant deficiency. I think the other items on the list, the funding of employee long-term benefits would be nice, but realistically, expecting they're going to fully fund OPEB is not a reasonable standard when that's not what, the majority of municipalities or even the state itself are doing. Preventing the fraudulent activities, I think actually we've got evidence, that they've done a good job there, that, it's unfortunate there's been, some more recent things, but they were discovered very early, corrected, and I think that's a sign that in fact the system is working. It's really that litigation and the unknown status of it that has me the most troubled about saying West Haven's at the point where they've met all the criteria and it's time for Marb to move out and move on.
Ms. Kinnison?
I just would like to bring one other thing to everyone's attention, and that is when you have vacant positions, it does create internal control weakness. This on the Board of Ed side, and we are aware that there are some critical positions right now that have not been filled. I guess I would have a question, because in that controlled weakness opens up areas of fraudulent activities when you don't have separation of duties. And so I would just ask, while two questions, one being for the city to tell us who is filling those roles right now of the director of personnel and labor relations when you don't have somebody at this very moment. I think that that is important for all of us to know, and especially that was a large area of vulnerability and it connected with payroll.
city?
Would you like me to take that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, sure. I think, I provided a response to that and just want to remind everyone that we filled 37 positions in the last 14 months. I know Mr. Hamilton said I've been in 18 months, but feels like, but it's been 14 months. But we filled 37 positions and got rid of all of our contract workers that were creating significant overtime. There was no vesting in those roles. We have a couple of vacancies. Everyone has a couple of vacancies. State of Connecticut has a couple of vacancies. That doesn't make everybody unsound. When it comes to personnel, myself and Corporation Counsel are filling those roles. I actually was a personnel director for 10 years in my prior life, very versed in employment law and working with Corporation Counsel. And we have 3 staff members in there that are very equipped operationally. Personnel does not run payroll. That comes through our finance department. It's not connected to the personnel department. And as you may recall, we hired a payroll manager and have significantly cleaned up payrolls. So I don't think that that is a risk. The only other big issue we have vacancy is water pollution control. And as you know, I've discussed in prior updates, that requires a class 4 license. There is a shortage in the state of Connecticut. We have been recruiting for several months. We do a lot of interviews and we're aggressively trying to fill that role. But when there isn't anybody to fill that role, it's difficult. But we have administrators overseeing the actual operations, and actually Deep was just in there doing an inspection of our plant. And besides saying there was a couple of areas that needed to be cleaned, they were surprisingly satisfied with what is going on, what our operations look like, considering we don't have that class 4 there. So I think to have a few vacancies, I can't imagine a city again or the state that doesn't have a few vacancies, but that doesn't make everybody else unsound. But I appreciate that. And just while I can on the police pension, it's in litigation. So as we know, that can last 1 year, 2 years. I've done what I thought I could do as a leader of the city, called November, asked everybody to come to the table. Can we try to do it through mediation? A judge was brought on board, all parties got together. It seems to be slightly stalled at the moment again. There is nothing I can do to make either party move faster, except for try to bring folks together. So, to have us, all of our other operations stay within the tier for a measure that's out of our control and is really in your control is a little unfair. I understand we want to resolve it. We all want to resolve it. Our police officers want to resolve this. But everybody has to work together to bring this to fruition. It can't just be me trying to get everybody to the table. But I don't know that that's realistic, because if it goes south and it ends up in the court again, we're in court for another year. So that is my, pitch on the police pension. I do think the police officers, after being in court, when I asked them if they would come to mediation, they did. They were willing to concede on some items. I don't know if all the Marb is aware of that. And I think they want to settle it because they want to know they have a pension in place that is reasonable. But I can't make it happen. I can't make a resolution through the courts happen.
Mr. Alvarez.
Thank you. And I think to Mr. Hamilton's point, when we first were discussing this, I thought that was a reasonable sort of outstanding question that I wasn't sure about. I put a lot of stock in the mayor's response to that. And I said this in our subcommittee meeting. I'll reiterate it in case I'm getting it wrong in any way. It was my understanding, and we might have discussed in executive session, I will not discuss what we discussed, but that the Marb members gave clear directives to our attorneys about what outcome we would want to see and be comfortable with. And I don't think that was one that was to maintain this long sort of protracted fight over this. And so I would just maybe reiterate to our attorneys that was the position of the Marb members as I understood it. But then along with that, it is the sort of functional role of Marb. Does it make sense for going forward for however long this litigation takes, for the Marb to be approving every single contract that the city has. Like the tier 4 status is an incredibly high burden on a municipality, and it's put in place because there's clear evidence that that municipality, without that high burden placed upon it, will have severe financial issues. I don't think that there is a clear case that that is the case anymore, and I think we should consider it a really, really high threshold when a city is not only asking to exit Marb oversight, but has demonstrated incredibly, that I think we would all agree on, incredible not only progress but outcomes as a result of the work being done. And so to Mr. Hamilton's point earlier, I completely get. I'm not exactly sure what to do there, but I also don't know what our functional role is if it's this litigation just keeps going, and so we keep exercising the oversight of the municipality, when the outcome will be there will be some determination of what that is. And it's already, whatever the cost is, the full cost is incorporated into the 5-year plan that we had already approved. And so I don't know, if we get a resolution that we're not entirely happy with, what recourse does the Marb have if it's already been essentially decided on that particular front? So I don't know what function we would play beyond simply waiting until there's a resolution and then having really no role once that resolution is reached.
I don't know if Mr. Hamilton has any reaction or wants to say anything on that. If not, we can move on to Mr. White's got his hand up. Mr. White, you're muted.
Okay, Tom, you don't have anything. I just want to reiterate.
I don't know what to say. I'll.
Okay, let me give you a prompt. I think we got to focus on exactly what the issue is that I think's bothering Tom, I know is bothering me, and I know is bothering Kim, which is this: the the whole way that the current pension came up leaves a bad taste in the mouths of a lot of us. We authorized 10,000 for retention, and then all of a sudden something pops up. Oh, to retain them, we also need this kind of pension. And we were very flexible about defined benefit. That's probably okay. But the one thing that got us was that there was a goodbye kiss by the former administration to the people that are nearing retirement. And my recollection is that in the out years, very beyond 5 years, that it rose to a $12 million a year item instead of, I think, 5. Okay, that's the issue that's bothering me. OPEB doesn't bother me. Quite frankly, some of the other aspects of the litigation don't bother me, but it's the driver of the $12 million in the out years that bothers me. And either don't do that, and maybe they've already agreed not to do it. I don't know. I think an agenda item is a report from our lawyers in executive session as to where we are, because we may just be wasting our breath talking about something that's already done. That is the part of it. There can be other things that happens in the litigation that, if we set a ground rule that it can't result in more than X, in the future, a generous X, then that's it. So I think we got to focus on that. And hopefully our lawyers can say, well, that issue is off the table. We've got other issues that don't affect their exit. So I think we need information, and the cost way out is an unsound financial practice. Thank you.
I have Ms. Kinnison next, but Kim, I don't really need any more on any of the merits of any of this from you. What have you got?
Bob summed it up.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay, let's hear from the city.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I think that, yes, that the union did come to the table and they were conceding some issues. And honestly, if this is a major criteria for a city in tier 4 to be released, I think that you probably should have been updated on the mediation. Right? This is a significant issue. So I think the Marb members should have been apprised as to what has been transpiring, and what the union was willing to do, because I think this would have made this conversation, a little bit more productive. And also, I just want to go back to something Kevin Alvarez said about what, and I don't want to say value, I'm trying to look for another word, but we're short for time. The continual Marb oversight. So I think if you will, if you can also weigh, right? We hear from our bond agency, you are doing tremendous progress, except for that little thing that you're in state oversight, that would really help. We hear from our investors, from our developers, you guys have turned the corner, you're turning around, you're strong. That little state oversight thing is bothering us. So I think at some point, while these issues are very critical, and I'm not underestimating them at all, you have to think about, in helping West Haven by staying in Marb, right? What outweighs our progress? You know, is the state, I use the word oversight for lack of another word, is the state oversight starting to hurt our efforts when we have very few issues kind of hanging out there?
I think it's useful at this point because we need to kind of wrap up today and get to these contracts. Could Kim and or Gareth, who I know is on the line, just describe what has to happen for the city's status in Tier 4 or in front of the Marb at all to change? What are the options? What are the steps, etc.? Can someone enlighten us again? Because I'm a little fuzzy and I should know better. So if we decide to, I assume we can let them go from Marb oversight entirely. I assume we can move them to a different tier. What's involved with any of that? Take the first one. If they're, how do they leave Marb? Here we go. Someone's going to share their screen.
I don't know who's driving.
Who's narrating? Is that Gareth?
It's Gareth, but Kim, why don't you go? The statute's
No,
right
I'm
here.
going to let you drive, please.
Okay.
Let me just go on camera.
So Gareth, if the board, if the decision here is we don't think that they should be under the Marb anymore, what do we do?
So you go down to B1 and it just lays it out. It says if the Marb determines that a municipality has satisfied the criteria, etc., right? The secretary, at the secretary's discretion and in consideration of the fiscal condition of the municipality and the best interest of the state, terminate such municipalities tier designation or redesignate such municipality to a lower tier, provided no such municipality shall be redesignated as a tier 1 municipality. So you have a lot of flexibility. Once this board makes its decision, and if there's a decision to allow it to get out of tier 4, then you roll into B1. And
Okay.
you will be guided and given counsel by this board.
Okay.
Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
So the first step, to summarize, is the Marb has to determine that they've satisfied the criteria. However, the board in their each member's heart and mind thinks that that's true. That sounds like that's a vote of the board that they've satisfied. And then I am supposed to think about what the best interest of the state is, and I can either terminate them from designation and redesignate. Can I just let them go, or do I have to redesignate them to a lower level?
Based
Not
on this, yeah, based on the board, they can decide whether the criteria needs to be at a lower level. Let's say they think that we need the significant deficiency close. I'm using that as an example. Then it would be you could lower the tier for a period of time pending additional.
I get that.
Okay.
I get that.
Yeah.
I have discretion, but what is
Yes,
our,
sir.
what is the? Can I let them go, or do I have to put them at a lower tier? Doesn't look like I can do anything other than put them at a lower tier.
In my reading of it, it says terminate such municipalities tier designation or redesignate. So you would be able to let them go.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Mr.
I had my
Bai,
hand up.
Attorney Bai, thoughts?
I agree with Kevin's response.
Okay.
I had my hand up, but I wanted the
Very good.
people to talk through.
Very good. Well, we've educated everybody on this call, including me. And we changed this last year. I think this got amended. So I wasn't clear on what the current law was. All right. So step one would be a vote of the board that they've satisfied the criteria, and step two would be I'd have to make a decision about keeping them either at a lower level or letting them go entirely, as I read the statute. Anybody else have a thought here, Mr. Hamilton?
Yeah, I guess this is a question, legal question. Because earlier the mayor had indicated, it's her position that she thinks West Haven has met the criteria to be released entirely from, any of the designations under the Marb statute. So my question for Gareth is, does the superintendent, not superintendent, does secretary have sort of full discretion, or does West Haven have to meet the criteria to be entered into, say, a tier 2 or tier 3 designation? Or is it really completely at the secretary's discretion as to whether or not to place them in one of the lower tiers?
Gareth, did you get the question?
Sorry, I was on mute. I was just trying to not have back a feed. So, Mr. Hamilton, it says the secretary's discretion and in consideration of the fiscal condition of the municipality and best interests of the state. So the secretary would be looking at all of the conditions and then seeing if there was a need to consider going to a tier 2 or a 3. Again, it's his discretion, but all of those factors would be considered from the standpoint of due process and due diligence.
So, Mr. White.
Yeah, just to move this along. I mean, I think the city wants out completely. Quite frankly, I don't see any benefit to a lower tier. So one of the issues is time. I think we have to, at least as I saw it, we have to wait until they do their 5-year plan, which everyone expects is going to pass muster. And we have to wait for our financial manager to sign off on the whatever the outstanding things are, and we've got to find out, maybe, as the mayor hinted, maybe the issue, at least that was bothering me and I think others, may be off the table in terms of the litigation, which just leaves whether the city would voluntarily submit a plan on what to do in the event of financial insolvency of one of the districts, which I think can fall within your discretion, and I think is a good thing to do anyway. I don't want to hold them up, and I just so I think that if that is a template for a timetable, then let's try to fill that in. That's probably certainly June 30th or before event.
How about we have a special meeting with executive session to discuss the litigation, say in 2 weeks-ish, and then we can go from there. Thoughts on that? I'm seeing a couple of nods. Okay, Mr. Alvarez?
Yep.
I just was going to say, I think that's a great idea.
Ah, lovely.
I agree.
I love it when people tell me I'm great, Kevin. Just keep going.
You're not the only one.
So without objection, that's what I'll tell the staff to do. Let's have a special meeting in 2 weeks. We'll have the lawyers update us. That will inform your decisions, and we can go from there. We may schedule something after that date as well. The city has got their hand up.
Yes, Mr. Secretary. If the meeting is in 2 weeks, I would respectfully ask that all the information be provided to everyone prior to the meeting so that it could be digested and
well, here's the
where
thing.
we stand with mediation, what information we have.
Okay.
What the
Well, let me just
proposal
say,
is by the union.
we'll have to discuss what it was we could share, because if we're in executive session, the justification for that is we're discussing confidential matters. And if we're telling everybody outside the board, that's not really confidential. So I think we need to hear from our lawyers about our position in the litigation. I understand the city and the union have counsel who could probably provide you some information. I don't know. But I think the point of executive session discussion would be to discuss confidential litigation matters. Mr. Alvarez.
I think, and I don't want to speak for the mayor, I think she was just suggesting that the Marb board members get whatever has been offered by the cities or the union prior to the meeting so we can review it. I think that's what she meant, but I don't want to.
That's fine with me. Yes, that would
is
make
what I meant.
sense.
Thank you for recapping. So
Okay.
at that meeting, just looking for a little direction, that's all. So in 2 weeks, we'll be discussing that. Are you concluding today that that is the last remaining criteria, or are the other issues still on the table? Are you still figuring that out? Where do we stand?
So we've had a robust discussion today about the criteria, and I think you've heard members express their opinions about individual ones and what may influence or inflict their vote. And it'll be a vote by the board at some point as to whether or not you've met the criteria, and they will have each thought about these and perhaps others, and they'll either vote yes or no whenever we get there. That's how I understand it. If there other board members have a different view. My thought was we were going to have a set of criteria and sort of grade you publicly, but I think I take the point of the board that we're grown-ups here. We can read this list and we can come up with do we think you've met them or not? And do we think they're important enough or not? And each member will have their own reasons. And I think we've been public about what those are. If there's a different view out there, I'm happy to listen to it. This has been useful. I think I know where I'm headed on my vote, and I think we do need to have that meeting to let people know where we are with the litigation, because that informs a few members' thoughts and about where they're going to vote. And if there's any other information they need, I hope that they'll let us know, and we can have the staff get out to you if there's other information we need from you. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Oh, we were muted. Sorry. I just want to leave you with this last thing. If each member is going to have, respectfully, their opinion, each member can find one thing out of that criteria in totality that they may not agree with. And I don't know if that's a process of coming to consensus, right? So when you come to consensus, you look at it again in totality. So each person can find one thing that they may not agree with, which would make a no and a no and a no, when really we met 99% of the other things. So I don't know that I agree with that process. Of course, the board has to vote, but I think maybe more of a consensus is a little bit more structured, is just my opinion.
Well, we'll need a majority of votes, which is a consensus of a sort. That's how we do it in a democracy, and we'll see what happens. Mr. Alvarez.
I would just say for both the city and the Marb, I felt like this discussion was, one, very helpful for me, and two, I felt like we were moving towards a consensus. We don't necessarily all agree or see things from the same perspective, but it did feel like we were moving in that direction, and that this next meeting to understand where we're at with litigation is one of the few outstanding things that a number of members had concerns about, that I think will be very informative to a sort of broad consensus of the Marb. But so that's just what I would say for, I think, maybe some degree of clarity or peace of mind.
Okay. So since I think we've got a plan there for going forward, if there's no further discussion on that item, why don't we go ahead and I'll take one motion on all of these non-labor contracts. But before we take the motion, do people have any questions of staff or the city about these non-labor contracts? You had these in your packet. We'll just try to move this along. Any questions? No questions about the contracts. Well, then I'll take a motion for approval of all three of them.
I make a motion to approve.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. The contracts are approved. We will schedule a special meeting in about 2 weeks whenever everyone is available. We'll get a briefing from the attorneys. It'll be an executive session. We'll make sure members have whatever materials the attorneys feel we can send out to members ahead of time. And And that's what we'll do. Any other thoughts about that? I note that our regularly scheduled meeting is April 24, but that would hopefully be at the LOB. But we will obviously meet between now and then in special meeting. This has been very good. I appreciate all of you. I've learned a little bit from everybody who spoke today, and I appreciate that. I think we're headed towards something here. So, all right. Well, we'll see you all soon. Motion to adjourn. Anyone?
I'm a
Second.
Moved and seconded. All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? Motion carries. See you soon.
Thank you.